Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. There we go. I like that. Let's try that again in Martha style. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And good afternoon and welcome to all of you, family and friends who are watching around the world. At this time, if anybody has a cell phone or anything else that makes noise, if you'd be so kind, just to make sure that's in the silent or vibrate mode, we would very much appreciate it. You're a good group. Usually I have a few seconds while all the noise is being made from the pagers and things going off. Doug has one of those complicated flip phones, which I admire and almost offered to trade the funeral for the flip phone, I must say. For those of you I haven't met, and for those of you watching virtually, my name is D.J. Wright, and on behalf of my family and our care team, our thoughts and our prayers are with all of you. I've been fortunate enough over the last several weeks to become saddened. Saddened because I didn't have the privilege to know personally this dynamic and wonderful woman. So I'm going to do my best today as Life Celebrant, Master of Ceremonies, if you will, and I'm going to keep my remarks short to help you all navigate this new path of life. A new path which, as I told the family, is going to be difficult. No question. But a path that Martha, whether you have realized it or not, has given you all the skills and the map to navigate. To make it not a difficult path. As I said before, we're honored for all of you who are watching us. I know we have family in Tunisia, friends and colleagues all over the world watching, and although it's sad that we can't be together due to certain challenges that the medical field has certainly risen up to, and we thank them for, we're lucky to be able to have the technology to bring us all together. So I would ask those of you watching virtually, if you could just put everything else aside and pretend you were physically with this family in this time, in this space, I know it would be better for everybody. So I would kindly, out of respect, ask you to do that. Today we're going to hear from several people, and I can't say that they were colleagues or that they were family, because if you knew Martha, you were family. There was no differentiation. She loved and was love. So I thought, what better way to open today's time together than with a poem by Frida Feldman. That's short, sweet, to the point, Doug, because we don't want to drag out too long. Short, sweet, to the point, just like Martha. It's entitled Love. And especially as and for those of you who are not with us, it's been very nice outside today. The snow is melting, which means the sun is out. And as we hopefully look towards that spring and summer, where I know she would be at that beach spending many time enjoying the weather and the love, hear these words by Frida Feldman, again entitled Love. Love has no season. It comes in the night of winter, in the midday summer sun. It has no reason to be born, but I have never known it to be wasted. Seasons change, and so love's form. I hear all the time, and it frustrates me, people when they come to a funeral home say, we lost so-and-so. We didn't lose Martha. How can you lose such a dynamic force of nature, an energy? And for those scientists among us, energy, force can neither be created nor destroyed, right? I know Martha was very much of that belief as well. Love has changed. The form has changed. But who she was, is, and always will be does not. And that's a bit about what we're going to hear today. And I hope under your mask you're smiling when you hear all these stories and these anecdotes. And yes, it is okay to laugh at a funeral home. As a matter of fact, I know Doug, Stephen, and Beth would appreciate it if you did. Seasons change, and so does love's form. After Martha's untimely passing, I started to get quite a few phone calls from her patients who were scheduled to see her. And they were very upset. A visceral response of a child losing their parent, a brother losing their sister. The reactions were heartfelt. And I tell you that not to make you sad or upset, but just that doesn't usually happen. People don't call us to do that. But they didn't know where else to turn. And so I asked some of them to just, they felt comfortable to share some of their words. And I have two that felt comfortable and wanted these words to be shared, and I thought it was a very appropriate way to lead into our speakers. So again, these are all read with permission and encouragement. First is from Regina Kennan. Martha Lansing was my doctor for about 30 years. It was so long ago that I can no longer remember when our relationship started. I do remember that she sold her private practice to RWJ because she couldn't practice medicine in 10 minutes per patient that the new reimbursement schedule demanded. It was at that time that I realized that Dr. Lansing was a gem, and that gem was burnished in all the years that I knew her. Martha was more than a physician to me. She was also a friend, a counselor, a mentor. She read my academic papers and encouraged me in pursuing some of my out-of-the-box ideas that didn't fit the paradigm of the time. She lived through my children's marriages, the birthday of grandchildren, and the death of my parents and my husband. I cannot believe that she is gone, but she will always live in my heart. While my grief is great, I am sure that it is minuscule compared to that grief felt by her family, and my heart goes out to them. With love, Regina. And this is from Shara Reichenwald. For many, many years, I followed Dr. Lansing from medical practice to medical practice. She was not only a stellar, I love that word, stellar physician, she was a compassionate, fun-loving human. Dr. Lansing genuinely cared about me as a patient and as a person. We would exchange stories, laugh, and cry together. 7 years ago, Dr. Lansing saved my life when my lungs had mysteriously stopped functioning properly. After that, I met a number of Dr. Lansing's medical students who she would bring into my appointments to learn about my strange case. So today, I thank Dr. Lansing, I thank her family for sharing their wife, their mom, their Mimi with me. She'll be part of my heart always. Thank you with love, Shara. Just two of the many, many, many stories. I'm going to ask the chair of the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, also the professor, the head professor, an all-around good guy, and Martha's traveling buddy, participant in a lot of different things, Dr. Alfred Talia.
Thank you, DJ. Good afternoon, everybody. Tunisia, boy, we're a world. We got the whole world covered today. It's amazing. So today we celebrate the life of our beloved Martha Anne Hempel Lansing. And what we'd like to do is share with you some brief remembrances that we have. There'll be four of us from the medical school who have the privilege of working with her. And perhaps it might give you some insight into why we all loved her as an incredible human being. I can remember when I first proposed Martha to join me in the department leadership as vice chair, there were a couple of individuals who who were concerned that someone, shall we say it, her stage of career wouldn't have sufficient energy, okay, for the role. They couldn't have been more wrong. She would take on night call, hospital service, counseling, special projects, you name it, that really, in terms of energy level, put people 30 years younger, maybe 40 years younger, certainly me, to shame. She was just an energizer bunny beyond belief. She saw the big picture. She loved taking care of patients, which she did incredibly competently. And folks would wonder, what were the sources of her incredible energy, her wisdom, her balance, and most importantly, her capacity to understand the complexities of human behavior? Well, I would argue that part of that was from her love, appreciation, understanding of music, particularly classical music. Many of you may not know that Martha was a music major in college, and her instrument was the organ, that grand instrument that requires not just manual dexterity, but also the capacity to play a keyboard with your feet at the same time you're trying to blend in all these different sounds from the different pipes. Incredible. We were walking during a break at a conference, I remember, in New Orleans a couple of years ago. And we were just wandering around the French Quarter. We happened to just, I don't know, wind up in St. Louis Cathedral very briefly. And the organist was playing Charles Marie Widor's great organ toccata from his Fifth Symphony, which, as it turns out, was Martha's graduation piece, which she had to play. And, I mean, if you've never heard this piece, you've got to listen to it. It really is incredible because of the grandeur it inspired in her, but also the complexity of understanding it requires in the organist. Similarly, we often spoke about her love of Bach, which she also listened to and played expertly. Indeed, her appreciation of the complicated, almost mathematical genius of Bach, to me, explains her thinking and capacity to weave together explanatory models of the complexity of human behavior, of which she was a master. So we had many such conversations, and her love of music and related mastery of understanding human behavior is something that I will always remember and cherish. There are so many other stories I could tell you about, but and believe me, I can go on for hours in lectures, but let me invite Dr. Aditi Bhattacharya to come up and say a little bit about her recollections.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I first met Martha many years ago at a conference in New Jersey. I was the speaker, and Martha was in the audience. At the end of the talk, we had a lively discussion about women's health in the United States, just in a Martha fashion. And needless to say, both of us missed the lecture that we were both supposed to go to following that. Little did I know at that time that, this was the beginning of a very long friendship. I didn't get to know Martha really well until I moved to Capitol Health to their residency in Lawrenceville. She soon became my mentor, my guide, and of course a close friend. She was the rock that helped our residency grow and flourish and, do such great things once we moved to Trenton. Over the years, she became my physician and I hers. but mostly we were buddies. We would talk for hours on anything under the sun. And I see here now, when I see her scarves, we often used to compare scarves. So that was a passion both of us had. So Martha, like all of you know, she was an exceptional woman. She had lots of great qualities, but one of them was that she was an excellent educator. And I can see some faces in here who can, who've had the experience of, being taught by Martha. And over the years, she touched the lives of many students and colleagues. In the past few weeks, I have received numerous emails from our former residents remembering Dr. Lansing. I'd like to share a few of them with you. One said, "She respected her students. She truly cared about us," writes Flavia. "She invested in us as human beings, and not only did she shape us into better physicians, she made us into better people." That was our Martha. "She led by example. You just had to watch her with patience, and you learned how to approach difficult situations. Even now, when I face a difficult situation, I say to myself, how would Dr. Lansing handle this?" This is from Maria Pabletti. "She had amazing medical knowledge." John Kane writes, "Dr. Lansing seemed to know every treatment under the sun for any particular condition. From old home remedies that she knew worked to the latest therapy that had just been approved, Dr. Lansing had an answer for everything I knew." She was a complete teacher and a complete healer. And like, you heard about her patients, she met her patients at their level and never judged them. She was like a vessel of knowledge and a resource for those in need. She not only treated her patients, she healed them. And this is why her patients followed her from Plainsboro to Lawrenceville to Trenton and then finally to Monroe. This is by Sarah Coker. "She encouraged curiosity and set really high expectations. She taught me to be a lifelong learner." This is from Andrew Saleh. "And she was very patient-centered. Dr. Lansing was one of my greatest mentors. I will never forget her dedication and passion for family medicine. She always put patients first." This is from Nitin Gandhi. There were many, many more tributes that came in. Unfortunately, we do not have the time to go over them. I'm going to have them published in our New Jersey Academy of Family Physician journal, and I will make sure that Doug and Stephen, you get a copy. So I'd like to end by quoting a small poem by William Ward. Ward said, "The mediocre teacher tells. The good teacher explains. A superior teacher demonstrates. A great teacher inspires." Martha inspired.
Thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya. And everyone, obviously, Dr. Bhattacharya is now the Associate Director of the Hackensack Meridian Family Medicine Residency at JFK and Edison, so still not too far, and you were able to keep up that wonderful relationship with Martha, so we thank you. I'm going to now ask Dr. Shara Siddiqui, who is the Chief of Hospital Medicine at Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital in New Brunswick, to come forward to share some of his thoughts about Martha.
So I was lucky enough that I was hired by Martha twice. She gave me my first job as a resident and hired me years later as an attending. I think I was one of those special projects that Al talked about earlier on. She wasn't done with me in residency, so she figured, let's try again. So I almost didn't make that journey because my first year of residency, I'll never forget it. I had a pretty crazy patient experience, and I was a bit traumatized. I knew that night Martha was in her hours at the office, and so I went there afterwards, and she sat me down. I went there with the idea that, hey, I'm not gonna go forward. I'm done with medicine. So she sat me down. She went through the whole thing, made me understand it on a different level, and years later, she hired me again at Robert Wood. and she wasn't done with me, you know. I would walk in her office all the time, angry, as usual. A lot of my attendings are here that know me well from residency, and I'm still very angry, but not as much. But the problems we would have at that point and conversations we would have would be more about understanding people and politics and why people do what they do. Just like she taught me back in the day about why, you know, things happen with patients, she would teach me how to dissect and understand, which I now have the ability to do with my staff, because having been exposed to Martha for 13 years, it's ingrained in what I do. Sorry. Like I said, what she taught us, all the classes that we're able to learn from her, we're now passing on to other people. So her style of teaching will always live on. You know, and we always wonder why she did what she did. And one of the other stories I like to tell people was one day I was at the residency and I was telling David Lee, our coordinator, I like to sleep in on Saturdays. You know, the next schedule that came out had me working 8 straight Saturday mornings. You know, my kids appreciate that now because they're up at the crack of dawn. So I haven't slept early or late since then. So, you know, we all owe Martha a lot for our careers, those of us that were able to study underneath her, and we'll always be very grateful. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Siddiqui. Sometimes no words need to be said. You can feel what the heart is telling, so thank you for your words. I'm going to ask Dr. Dorothy Borenson, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson, to share some of her remarks.
Thank you, Shiraz, for that. It was wonderful. Thank you to Doug and Stephen and Beth for asking me to speak. I'm really grateful about that. And I'm going to try to do it. It was so hard for me to decide what to talk about because, as we've all heard, Martha was just an unbelievable, extraordinary person. She was my friend, colleague, and mentor for almost 30 years. I can't believe it. She was an exceptional physician and teacher, and I could go on and on about that. She and I did work really hard with Shiraz. I was his advisor. And I've been so happy that he's up at Robert Wood because we've gotten to continue to see each other, at least pre-pandemic. So what I decided to do is just tell you a short story that I think really illustrates how deeply Martha touched people. When I told my son John, who is now 42, so I'm giving away my age, that Martha had died, I'd been keeping him up on the fact that she was sick. His first words to me were, "Oh, no, I know how close you were." And then he paused and he said, "Martha saved my foot." It's a long story, one that Doug knows and remembers too, because we talked about it the other day. I'll give you just a Cliff Notes version. After a very minor surgery on his toe, my son had been like an elite soccer player, and if anybody knows anything about soccer, his feet were destroyed by 19. He'd had this minor surgery, and he developed fever, and he developed pain. I called the surgeon a few times, and he was dismissive. He wasn't really helpful at all. And eventually I took John to the ER, where they gave him antibiotics and suggested we see an infectious disease doctor, which we did. He said that John could leave for Oregon, where he was in college. John was driving to Oregon, and return to college just to stay on the antibiotics a little longer. But I was uncomfortable. John didn't feel good. and he had a low-grade fever, and all of you who have children know you just know when your children aren't right. So of course I called Martha. And she saw John that day. And first she sat down next to him and listened to us very, very carefully as we told the story kind of together. He was 19, so it was his story, but I had to get my part in too. Then she had him take off his shoe and sock off of his good foot, and she gently unwrapped the dressing on the affected foot. I'll never forget this, she held both his feet in her hands. She prodded and squeezed gently and asked John lots of questions. She remarked to John how hot his foot was. He was in a lot of pain, and it was a painful exam. She immediately called the surgeon, who was defensive, and told her that John must be immune compromised. He asked her if John was a drug addict. Now, my son was a soccer player back then and had long hair, but believe me, he was not immune compromised and he wasn't a drug addict. He told her this couldn't possibly be a complication of the surgery. Martha was frustrated, but only I knew that. She quietly took over, and I could tell that she would be able to sort the situation out. She was very concerned, and so was I. I'll spare you the details, except that John was briefly hospitalized at her behest, requiring intravenous antibiotics, and after many, many, many weeks of antibiotics, because he had osteomyelitis, which is a bone infection. He recovered, but it was a long and difficult process. And unfortunately for him, I had to go on the plane and take him to Oregon. He didn't get to drive his car. But Martha had, in fact, saved John's foot. Martha was always one of, if not the smartest person in the room. But what made her truly great was her curiosity. Obtaining a history, persistent inquiry, skepticism of the status quo just came naturally to her, and probably was part of what made her a great organist as well. As Al said, she got the big picture. She listened relentlessly to all of us and to her patients, and she touched people. She knew that the key to answers was listening to people's story. She always told the residents that if you just listen to the story, you'll figure out what's going on. She was thoughtful, analytical, and caring all at the same time, which isn't easy. And even when she was swamped, she listened to all of her patients. And Denise and Annie know that because she would get very behind sometimes, but her patients didn't mind. That day, Martha listened to John, and she listened to me, and she touched him, and for that, I will always be grateful. Her touch was gentle, powerful, and reassuring. She was a healer, but her touch was more than that. It was essential to her process. She touched everyone who had the privilege to know her in so many different ways. When she talked to you, you knew she was really listening, and her passion toward her work was absolutely inspiring. She never grew complacent, always able to think outside the box, and she rarely missed anything. She's touched every one of us, and for that, we are grateful, and we'll miss her. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bornson. But please don't go too far. I'm going to ask you to stand right up here with Dr. Siddiqui, Dr. Bhattacharya, and Dr. Talia. Would you please join your colleague up there? Just kind of right next to one another. Pop quiz, ladies and gentlemen. No, okay. Off to my left here, and I will bring it closer for those of you who are watching on the camera. Something we had made for the family. Obviously, Martha graduating with all her regalia. Being a family means you are part of something very wonderful. It means you will love and be loved for the rest of your life. to the four of you, on behalf of Martha's spirit, and by the power vested in me by the Lansing family, we hope that you will wear your regalia with honor. Thank you all. Thank you all for your heartfelt words. I'm going to now ask the other woman who wears a scarf beautifully, who I guessed right away when she came through the door had to be Martha's sister. And I don't know if it's family that has that skill or you got it from your mom or your grandfather, but I'm going to ask Mary Hudson, Martha's sister, to come forward to share with us her remarks.
To be honest, I'm not sure when, which one of us first learned to wear scarves. I know, anyways, here we are, and it wasn't planned. But I'm here to talk today not about a professional, but about her as my big sister. And I was talking with Doug the other day and said I'm probably the only one that's known her longer than he has, since she was 20 months old when I was born. But she was my big sister, and I'm very, very thankful for her. And I'm thankful that she was part of my life. I'm thankful for the example she set for me, and she probably got annoyed at me from time to time because I did follow her everywhere. Our dad was a Methodist pastor, and so from the time we were born, we were really taught faith in God. And Martha was really bold in defending that faith, and that strengthened my own faith as I listened to her and watched her defend the faith that she believed in at that time. I'm thankful for the many ways that she paved the way for me. I don't have the energy my sister has, and I'm a lot shyer than she was, and was particularly more shy at that time. And yet she paved the way for me. When it was time for me to follow her to high school, she let the band and orchestra teacher know that I was coming. And that was such a blessing for me because I am not a musician. I played the trumpet badly. But Martha went to the orchestra teacher and said, you know, my sister's coming. And when I got there, the orchestra teacher was having everybody sing to see if they could carry a tune. And I thought, I've had it. There's no way this is going to happen. But as soon as, because Martha had let her know I was coming, she said, I want you. And that just was such a blessing for me because in a big high school, you needed to be in a small group. And you know, Martha probably never even remembered that she did that, but that was such a small act, and yet for me it was a big act, and that gave me confidence between what Martha did for me and the orchestra teacher, band and orchestra teacher, gave me the confidence. It helped me to be the person that I am today, and I'm thankful for Martha for making that possible for me. I'm thankful also for Martha and Doug and how they were surrogate parents for our son. Our son is the one who's watching in Tunisia now. And they were sort of an extra set of parents for him during his time studying at Princeton. We were overseas at the time for his first year, and so we were very thankful that they were close. And Doug was wonderful because he taught Andrew to drive, and I didn't have to do it. I'm so thankful. I will be eternally grateful, Doug. I don't know how many gray hairs you got from that, but... and then during the last 3 years, we were back in the States, and we often came up to visit them or visit Andrew, and Doug and Martha always welcomed us with great hospitality. And I'm so grateful for those times when we got to renew our friendship with Martha and Steve and Beth when you were around as well. And then I'm thankful for Martha for introducing us to the Outer Banks in Corolla. And I can't remember the first time that we came, had a family time. It's a long time ago. But we came from overseas, went to the Outer Banks, met with them, had sort of a family time. And we just fell in love with it. And so we, too, make that our family vacation every year. And I know our family looks back to it. I'm really, truly blessed to have had Martha as my big sister, and I shall miss her. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. We're now going to ask the baby boy of the family, Paul, the youngest of the three, to come forward and share with us some memories of his big sister.
So I am Martha's kid brother. I was born on Martha's 6th birthday, and that created a really special bond between us. For as long as I can recall, I look forward to the annual calls we had on her birthday to check in and see how we were each doing. We spoke in between, of course, but those birthday calls were special. Martha was one of the rocks in my life, someone I looked up to and could always go to for advice in times of difficulty. As a kid, we shared the same piano teacher, a Mr. Haberer, a German concert pianist from the city, under whose very strict tutelage she thrived, and I more or less survived. I recall being amazed when she played the Grieg Concerto with her high school orchestra, and totally thrilled at the sound of her playing the Widor Toccata on the huge new organ. I was interested to hear you mention that as well, because it's an amazing piece. And I remember hearing her play it on the new organ, the then new organ at Houghton College, where she graduated, and thinking, this is phenomenal. How could anybody do that? I love that piece of music today, and I always think of Martha playing it whenever I hear it. Martha always strove to reach the top achievement she could be and be the best person she could, and challenged me and others to do the same. When I graduated from college, I was a quite lost young man, and I prepared to be a teaching missionary, but during the psychological training, made the hard decision that this was not really what I wanted to do at all. And that caused a rift between me and most of my family, and I had nowhere to go. So I called Martha and got an immediate invitation to come to Michigan, where she and Doug were living at the time, and stay with them until I could figure my way out. I did. I didn't get a lot of sympathy or mollycoddling. That just wasn't how Martha worked. She allowed me to just be and figure it out on my own, and ask the kinds of questions I came to expect from her. What do you want to do? Years later, when I was about to turn 50, and after a long marriage I had ended particularly badly and suddenly, I was trying to come to grips with discovering that I was gay. I called Martha, of course. And she said I needed to come see her. I was a mess, full of self-loathing and guilt. By then, she had a busy medical practice here in New Jersey. But she cleared her schedule as much as she could and spent the better part of a night listening and then asking the kinds of difficult questions I had come to expect of her. The next morning, over coffee on her deck, I will never forget her asking me to think about what I wanted out of life. When I grew older and retired, which is where I am now, did I want to be sitting on a deck somewhere with a woman, or could I envision myself happily sitting on a deck, enjoying my retirement with a man? It was a shocking thought to me. But to Martha, no possibility of human happiness was inherently bad. That conversation empowered me to get back to figuring out my life, and ultimately led me to the happy life I have today with my husband on the South Oregon coast, often sitting on our deck, overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And I think of her. There were other times I turned to her and she responded. When I had a serious case of melanoma cancer 15 years ago and had a really difficult surgery and chemo, she showed up Not just showed up. She showed up at the hospital, took time away, and came and said, I'm going to be here when you go into surgery and when you get out. And like I said, why? You can't do anything. And she said, no, that's not the point. I'm going to be here. When I married my first husband, Ron Henderson, she showed up at the wedding. And when he was dying of liver cancer, she showed up regularly on the phone for support. And when I met Bruce, my husband of almost 10 years now, she showed up to meet him and has welcomed us to her home whenever we are in the area. In early January, my daughter, Jessie, told me that Martha was going in for surgery, and of course I called her, and we talked for a while. She didn't let on that it was serious, just that it was something that needed taking care of, and she expected to be back in her practice in a few weeks. She gave me some details, but the conversation soon switched to other things. I asked her when she planned to retire. I'd been retired for 6 years. And she was clear. She didn't plan to retire until she couldn't practice competently anymore. It was so completely Martha, always achieving the most she could and taking enormous personal satisfaction out of helping others as a physician, a teacher, a therapist, and to me, a sister. I will miss our birthday calls terribly. And when something happens in life where I need medical or personal advice, I will miss being able to call her and talk about it. But Martha will always be with me, because I know what she would ultimately say to any dilemma I brought to her. What do you want to be and to achieve? She would leave it to me to get the facts and make the choices, but she would empower me to make them with the knowledge that I was able to do that. So in every sense, I am filled with gratitude at having had Martha as a sister. And I will always be Martha's kid brother. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. What is essential does not die, but clarifies. The highest tribute is not grief, but gratitude. Those words spoken by Thornton Wilder so many years ago lead me to our next speaker, Jessie Hempel, Martha's niece, who is going to speak not only on behalf of her, but also on behalf of Martha's children, as she comes forward to share with us her words.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jessie Hempel, Martha's niece. Hi. That guy's kid. And I want to tell you about my aunt. So, Martha believed that people can change, that we can make ourselves better. As her son Stephen told me earlier this week, she made herself into the person that she wanted to be, and she supported other people in doing the same thing. And I think that's really amazing. Martha was the oldest of 3 children, born to a minister and his wife in 1942. She went to college for music. As we've heard, she was an amazing musician. It's where she met Doug when she was just 18. Doug told me recently that he could tell that there were going to be a lot of people interested in her, so he had to get in there really quick and ask her out. And they were together for 60 years. In the first decades of their lives together, Martha and Doug moved several times. They followed Doug's jobs within the federal prison system. They had Beth, and 3 years later, Stephen. Martha was a creative mom, which will surprise no one. She read to them and played with them, but at the same time, she was always interested in the larger world. And Beth remembers walking into the kitchen when she was, I don't know, you were 7 or 8, and seeing Martha at the table with fellow members of a neighborhood women's consciousness-raising group. And I think that makes her about the coolest aunt in the world. And anyone who knows Martha also won't be surprised to learn that she was so smart. Around that time in her life, Martha took apart the washing machine and put it back together just to figure it out. Martha and Doug were driven by the desire to be of service to the world. In the late 60s, they adopted a daughter, Lynn, who had significant challenges that she was never fully able to overcome. This was one of the struggles of their life, and it had a big influence on Martha's career. When she was 34, Martha went back to school. After taking some prereqs, she applied to medical school, and she was an unusual candidate. She was a mom in her 30s amidst a sea of young freshmen out of college, but she managed to persuade the admissions officers at the University of Oklahoma that her unique experience would make her a better doctor. And it did. In 1985, just as her eldest child was finishing high school, she started her own practice. She went on to study psychoanalysis and worked primarily with survivors of severe childhood trauma. And a lot of what you've heard today speaks to her amazing career as a doctor. But I want to speak to Martha's character beyond that, to her role as a wife and a mother and a grandmother and a sister and the aunt that we knew Martha to be. And of course, that starts with her role as the family doctor. Don't get me wrong. I kept in touch with her all the time, even when I was really not calling my parents back, because Martha was a critical member of my family. She had answers to the most critical questions, like when you get stuck in Spain and you have a stomach bug and you can't figure out whether to get on the plane, you call Martha. Or when my son got his first fever at 8 weeks old, call Martha. Or recently, I called her from my car parked outside our vet because we just found out our dog needed chemo and my wife was pregnant and couldn't really figure out how to make that decision, and would the chemo be problematic for my wife? Well, you call Martha, and her question is always the same, like, okay, is this serious? Explain what's going on. And then my question to her is always the same, hey, is this serious? Can you explain what's going on? Now, Martha didn't traffic in platitudes. She listened without judgment. She asked careful, specific follow-up questions. She asked me what I thought because she always believed that I was best positioned to answer my own questions. And when I had to make a hard call, in this case, deciding we really couldn't get chemo for the pup without putting my wife in harm's way, she went the extra mile. The next day, a medical study arrived in my email box. She'd been reading up on the dangers that chemo presents to pregnant women, because that's just how Martha was. Martha's attention was like the sun. From my youngest years, during trips to visit Martha, I'd try to wake up the earliest just to get a little bit of time with her alone in the kitchen. Long before I knew myself in any way, Martha was present with these guiding questions that let me know that I was loved and accepted, no matter who I was, and that I'd figure out what needed to be figured out. And I'm not the only one of her nieces and nephews who felt this way. Andrew Hudson, yes, that guy in Tunisia, he can't be with us, but he wrote to remind me that Martha was his surrogate mom during the years he was in college, and also to make sure that I thanked her in front of everyone publicly for loaning him the car to take that girl out on a date. So thanks for that. Martha believed that if you wanted to do something, you could do it, full stop. It was a message that she modeled for her children. Beth summed it up when she told me, the message that I got from her was that I could do anything I wanted to do. And this was something my mother had earned for herself. It was important to her to pass that message along. As a therapist now, Beth sees how this impacts her own work with her clients and what she tries to convey to them. Martha was Mimi to her grandchildren. She loved them beyond measure, and she found joy from their joys. I remember taking the train down to visit when Evelyn was just 4 months old. How Martha picked me up at the station, and she spent the entire ride back to the house telling me how she'd watched Evelyn learn where her hand was. Imagine, she told me, putting all that work into discovering that you have a hand, and then you know it, and then the next day you just start to teach yourself something else. Martha found every single thing about her grandchildren exactly this magical. In an email that I found from a few years later, Martha had invited me and my sister Katya down to visit Emmett. She writes, as though this were not actually opinion but fact, she writes, Emmett is really a cute baby. And he was. You are, Emmett. Martha hosted Evelyn and Emmett for weekly Sunday brunches. She loved to go swimming with them in the backyard pool. She and Doug nailed a small wooden house onto a tree and told their grandkids that fairies would leave presents there. Upon arriving at Mimi's for brunch, they'd rush into the front garden to see what small toys the fairies had left for them in that tree. Evelyn and Emmett, those fairies, they're really real. So now here we are, gathered today to mark this moment together. When there's a crisis, we call Martha to figure out what to do. That's her gift. But now the crisis is that we don't have Martha. So how do we move on without Martha? I was talking to Steve last week, and we both caught ourselves speechless as we thought about this, about what we could possibly do now when we couldn't call Martha. And then Steve pointed out that Martha's so consistent. We knew exactly what she would say. If we listen, we can still hear what Martha has to tell us. You've got this one, she'll assure us. So what are you going to do? Shortly before Martha entered the hospital, she called Beth. Beth was at the beach on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. It's a special place for the Lansing family, as we've heard a bit today. A place where they enjoyed some of their most precious moments together. Martha asked Beth to put the phone on video and walk out the door to the ocean. Martha watched the ocean appear, and she laughed. That distinctive, joyful Martha laugh, just to be with her daughter there by the ocean for a few minutes. Listen for it. I bet you can hear it too. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse, for those thoughtful words and such a moving visual as well. We do have words from one more person, but we are going to wait until the very, very end for those because they are so powerful and heartfelt and deserving of a way to conclude our time together. I wanted to share one reading before those words. Again, I struggled with what would Martha want to say. And then I stopped and realized all of you know in your own hearts, and that's not for me to try to get up and say. And then I thought, well, the good educator, right, she'd want to leave some pearl of wisdom. So I started to think. And then I said, I got it. And this is, being a Methodist minister's daughter, even though this has nothing to do with religion. It was found in 1692, and it was tucked in a hymnal in St. Paul's Church. Appropriate, an organist, minister's daughter, a hymnal, words that have nothing to do with religion. All fits, right? You may have heard this. It is a very powerful poem, extremely deep, but grounded. Grounded in faith in your own way, hope, and doing everything with love. The things that all of you, whether you realize it or not, all spoke about. Faith, hope, and love from Corinthians. Very well-read tale. But this is entitled Desiderata. And I think if Martha could get some more words across, this just might be it. Go placidly amid the noise and haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. As far as possible, without surrender, be on good terms with all persons. Speak your truth quietly and clearly, and listen to others, even the dull and the ignorant, for they too have their story. Avoid loud and aggressive persons because they are vexations to the spirit. If you compare yourself with others, you may become vain and bitter, for always there will be greater and lesser persons than yourself. Enjoy your achievements as well as your plans. Keep interested in your own career, however humble. It is a real possession in the changing fortunes of time. Exercise caution in your business affairs because the world is full of trickery, but let this not blind you to what virtue there is. Many persons strive for high ideals, and everywhere life is full of heroism. Be yourself. Especially do not feign affection, and neither be cynical about love, for in the face of all aridity and disenchantment, it is as perennial as the grass. Take kindly the counsel of the years, gracefully surrendering the things of your youth. Nurture strength of spirit to shield you in sudden misfortune, but do not distress yourself with imaginings. Many fears are born of fatigue and loneliness. So therefore, beyond a wholesome discipline, always, always be gentle with yourself. You're a child of the universe. No less than the trees and the stars, you have a right to be here. And whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Therefore, be at peace with God, whatever you conceive him or her to be. And whatever your labors and aspirations in the noisy confusion of life, keep peace with your soul. With all its sham drudgery and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. Be careful and always strive to be happy. 1692. A little bit of Martha right in there, eh? Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Doug, Stephen, Beth, their entire family, I want to thank you for all of your love and support, and I want to do kind of my final announcements now before the last remarks. The reaching out, the text, the emails, the handwritten cards, you know, the pen and paper, which people forget. They have meant so much to this family. And for all of you watching, everybody's asking, what can we do? What can we do? Well, one, there are donations on our website. They are creating a lectureship that's going to keep Martha's inspiration for all those studying and all those students to continue to learn. That'll be hopefully many, many years after we all have passed from this earth and Martha's spirit is still shining through. You can certainly donate to that, and I know that Doug and the family, when the inaugural event happens, hopefully we'll be having another get-together where we can eat and raise a glass and hug and do all the things that we can't physically do right now. And more information on that, again, will be coming from the school when the time comes for that inaugural talk to be launched. But the other thing you can do are the things that I just said. The thing that where the roles reversed and Martha here for somebody else, she'd be the first person to pick up that phone, to write that note, to just check in, because why not? And yes, she would do it immediately, but she would also 5 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, heck, whenever the mode struck her, she would be the one to make that phone call to that reach out. And I encourage all of you, the human condition is one that we all are going to be in this front row, mourning somebody we love, until that time where we are up here and somebody is mourning us. Martha knew that the most important thing we could do was be for each other. Simply be. So I encourage all of you to do that. And again, on behalf of the family, their thanks and sincere appreciation cannot be overstated. In a moment, after our concluding remarks, members of my care team are going to come by, calling you row by row. If you wish to come forward that final time, you're welcome to. We're going to ask that you do so in a manner of reverent silence so that people who are coming forward can pay their respects to the urn in private and just have their moment. After you've passed by the urn, you can certainly go across the hall into our other rooms and wait there if you'd like to see the family for a few moments before they depart. But I'm going to invite you to do something else as you come forward. You'll notice there are some seashells up here. That image is going to stick with me, Jesse, of you and Mom, Beth. I'm going to start crying now as I picture that, because knowing your mother from just the words, I know, that being probably touched her in the depth of the recesses of her soul that you can't put into words. So we encourage all of you to take a seashell, keep it in your car, put it on your desk, keep it in your drawer next to your bed. And when you need Martha, and just thinking about her isn't enough, pull out that shell. Let it inspire you. She'd find beauty in every shape. She'd find meaning in every curve, appreciation in every color. And yes, you can take two. We're not going to yell. You just can't take her scarf. That one's going back to Doug. Speaking of Doug, I'm going to ask him if he would be so kind to stand up next to me if he feels comfortable. You're going to all send him a lot of love. And if Beth, you and Steve want to come up with Dad too, that's all right as well. Whatever you feel comfortable. If you want to stand over here. You want to come up, Doug?
Let me say something.
Sure, absolutely.
Martha told me after I said, how come when I stand up, I'm dizzy for a few minutes, and I have to just stay where I am and count to 10, and then I can move. She said, it's simple. It's the way you work. You get older, it takes a while for the blood to get up where it needs to be. Otherwise, you're going to take a step and do something dumb. I passed that on to all my old coffee buddy friends. Now we get up from having coffee and we all stand here. That's a hell of a doctor.
You want to stand up here while I read this? Or do you want to read it?
I prepared something very short because it's all I could pull off. And I tried to read it this morning, and I was a disaster. But I still wanted it to be transferred to you, and I knew this gentleman could pull it off, so thank you very much.
It's my honor, Doug. So, I am very humbled to read this on Doug's behalf, so I'm going to ask you to do a little something different. I'm going to ask you just to close your eyes for a moment, and I want you to picture Doug and Martha. You've all seen them as that beautiful couple. I just want you to keep your eyes closed, and I want you to hear Doug's voice coming through rather than mine. I could talk about the remarkable Martha for a long time, but I want to share with you what for me has been one of Martha's qualities. It was so simple, but wonderful. Every morning when Martha was leaving home in her beloved Prius, headed for the parking garage where she battled with the concrete pillars, we had our hugs and our goodbyes. But what was so very special about those morning goodbyes was that she walked out to her car. She always gave me a beautiful smile. Really! Every single day it was the same. Year after year, the smile. And then, usually about 12 hours later when evening was coming and Martha arrived home, I would go to greet her. She often had a load of homework in various bags, boxes, or briefcases. Sometimes she was clearly very tired and was moving slowly. But as soon as she saw me, that wonderful morning smile was back, just as warm and bright and loving as ever. And as an aside, she never came home complaining about her day. Never. When we recently arrived at the hospital for her operation very early in the day, she left the car carrying a bag, entered through the front doors. She stopped, turned around, gave me the great smile, then off she went. Martha was unique. She enriched my life and the lives of our children and grandchildren and countless others. What a grand legacy. With love from Doug. Again, ladies and gentlemen, a very sincere thank you for all of your love and support. For those of you who didn't get a chance to sign the register book on your way in, please feel free to do so. Additionally, the books, memorial cards, the bookmarks for her former, future students, and also her final prescription, the prescription of life. They're all available if you'd like to take extras for family or friends who couldn't be here. At this time, members of my care team will call you to come forward if you feel comfortable. If not, feel free just to exit out of the main chapel, either to your vehicles or to the rear rooms where the family will greet you in a few moments. Thank you all.